Perfect. Well, welcome all to Coffee with Collections. The goal of this program is to give you all virtual visitors near and far a behind the scenes look at some collections pieces from the South Dakota Art Museum that you don't often get to see. So today's program will be about 30 minutes and we'll leave a question and answer period at the end. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat or feel free to talk with us one-on-one at the end of the program. I'm Taylor McKeown, Collections and Exhibitions Curator at the museum, and my co-host.
I'm Abby Ramsbottom, and I'm the Curator of Education at the museum.
Yeah, so you likely saw from your sign up, today's program really materialized from Repose, an exhibition which is on display at the museum through April 16th. Repose, and we'll pull up our slideshow here. Repose gathers artworks from the South Dakota Art Museum collections that depict human faces and figures. And it's really displayed in 4 categories, which we have some gallery shots up here. So featured portraits depict subjects posed intentionally with direct gazes, symbolic objects, and telling wardrobes. So this is one section of the portraiture section, and here are a gallery wall of done works. Other works reveal subjects in repose or in motion. So this is the in motion section, including this piece by John Peters, a Sioux Falls artist, a couple Duns, and works by Dakota artist Oscar Howe on the back wall there. And the next slide is the repose section. So these are both sections that underline moments of our universal connectedness through posture. And additionally, nude studies reference the centuries-old artistic heritage of artists examining and depicting the human body.
Yeah, and I just wanted to share some images of folks engaging in this space. It has been a really excellent exhibition for strategies, or BTS. We've had college students come in and talk about Lakota-centric by Keith Braypart and Michael Tubles, as well as we've always had exciting engagement with The Prairie is My Garden by Harvey Dunn, and these are 4- and 5-year-olds who are exploring and discovering alligators and snapping turtles in this painting. So and more than that, we've also been able to do some workshops in this gallery. If you've been into the space, you'll notice that the center of the room has some openness to it, and we've been able to set up drawing courses, and we have done 2 of 3 drawing workshops, and we'll have 1 more this month with Peter Reichart. So yeah, it's been an excellent show for programs as well. And just before okay, go ahead.
Good?
Yeah, sorry.
Good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so although the exhibition on display includes over 60 objects, there are over 40 other pieces that didn't make the cut. Today, we'll discuss the process of selecting objects from the permanent collections for exhibitions and really zero in on 5 objects, which will enable us to discuss the selection process in more detail. So this slide shows you a small grouping of those 40 works that didn't make the cut. About a year ago, we identified the presence of many strong figurative works in the collections and decided on gathering them into one space in an exhibition. And we really wanted this exhibit to highlight the diverse holdings of the museum, provide opportunities for related educational programming, and offer an opportunity for our visitors to not only connect with the subjects, the humans depicted, but with each other. And I think the show has already done that for many. So this loose idea grew into the current show, and early on, those 4 major themes kind of identified themselves. So very early on, with this criteria in mind, I began the selection process for the show and settled on a list of over 100 pieces Always looking to balance exhibitions with works that are comfortable and familiar, like The Prairie is My Garden, with pieces that maybe challenge our visitors some. So that was the kind of loose criteria that I started looking at our collection with, and pretty easily those 100 objects came together. Abby, do you want to talk some about your role in the early selection process?
Yeah, so, you know, Taylor really is the one who's building the narratives and thinking about the storytelling aspect of, you know, our exhibitions. But while they were kind of cutting down that list of over 100 works to what was going to actually be coming into the gallery, Taylor invited me into collection storage to view some of the images and give my input. And, you know, I become involved in that sort of selection process because I'm thinking about engagement and education, and I'm thinking about when people come on field trips, what works are really going to spark interest and encourage creativity and connecting with others. So really, I just try to serve as another voice to promote, you know, great works that have a lot of interesting detail or something unique to them. And to kind of lay out what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be thinking about a few different topics and how decisions are made when making selections for an exhibition. So we're going to be thinking about object condition and conservation, education and interpretation, physical constraints in the gallery, artistic intent, as well as relevance to theme and repetition and uniqueness. So that's a little bit some guiding words that can help us look at certain works today.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we'll start with our first object, which will be on your screen, but it's also in between Abby and I. We pulled it from collection storage today to kind of give you a sense of its scale. So this is a oil on canvas painting by Frank Street, who was a student of Harvey Dunn's. Many of you know Harvey Dunn is the South Dakota born artist who went on to an illustrious career in illustration, and the South Dakota Art Museum has the largest holding of his work. It's really one of our cornerstone collections, so we're often pulling done into these permanent collection shows or in separate exhibitions, but we also have a good selection of works by his students. This object was an example of a work that we couldn't show because of condition issues. So even on the screen, you can see on all four sides, the tension on the canvas is quite loose and has caused the stretcher bars to kind of create a fold line on all four sides. There's some paint loss, and I don't think it shows up so much on the PowerPoint, but there's a really heavy grime layer. So I had selected this work from our collections database, pull everything up on my computer first, and then we physically go into collection storage to review if we can even safely show a work. So this was kind of one of the first reasons that objects were cut from the exhibition. We had decided that moving and displaying this object could impact its safety and lead to more damage. And second, we always aim to honor an artist's intent in displaying the work. And with the current condition, we decided that it would detract from how Street had originally intended it to be shown. But luckily, we've been long-term members of the Midwest Art Conservation Center in Minneapolis, and they've treated many works in the collection over the years. And this one might end up in Minneapolis someday if we find a good fit that we really think it needs to be shown in an exhibition. We'll get it to the conservators.
And I would just wanted to add that, you know, this piece, while it would have been great up in the gallery, we do have a piece that's kind of serving a similar subject matter and exploration. I think both in the Dawn and the Street, you see a lot of exploration of like the representation of textile and fabric, and we kind of have that with the portrait of Helen Gilmore upstairs. We also have the relaxed stance of someone, you know, kind of calmly posing for a portrait. So we felt that it wasn't necessary to put out the street for that reason as well. Okay, so the piece on the right is the piece that we is in our collection that we cut, and then this piece on the left is a example from the Metropolitan, which I'll be speaking to. So I think this is a great example of a work that requires careful interpretation and engagement. Racist Target is a sculptural work by Michael Warwick that was considered for incorporation into Pose Repose. While reading about this piece, I read that in 2010, it was deemed controversial by curators for an exhibition at the South Dakota Art Museum. And looking directly at the piece, I'm made to consider racial injustice and violence that is targeted at communities of color. But more important than my personal reaction, however, I ask these questions when I think about incorporating works for audience engagement. How might visitors interpret this work? How will this work be interpreted within the context of the exhibition? Could this work trigger our visitors? And if so, how would we address that? And finally, what was the artist's intent? In his 1989 artist statement, Warwick said he aimed to visually explore the physical and psychological outcome of human dramas, which are the results of intense domestic or political situations. When you go through the Pose Repose gallery, you'll see that the wall labels are relatively minimal. Some labels may provide an artist statement or biographical information about the artist. With the incorporation of this artist statement, it still feels that the object requires careful unpacking. So in my research for this program, I found that Warwick used Nkisi Nkondi stylistic rendering to create Racist Target. Minkisi, which is plural for Nkisi, are sculptural vessels made by the peoples of the Congo. This example on the left is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art and was dated back to the second half of the 19th century. These Minkisi were used for divine protection and stored sacred medicines within. The Minkisi were and are spiritual vessels meant to protect communities or even cause harm to others. The Nkisi Nkondi in particular is a power figure which would have been made by or under the divine authority of an Nganga, a spiritual leader, who would be able to activate the Nkisi Nkondi's spiritual power. With this in mind, I question if it is appropriate for Warwick to create a version of a spiritual vessel of the Congo without the guidance of an Nganga to present racism and racial violence. And I also question if we at the museum would be able to effectively interpret this work, seeing that this information that I've written up is much longer than our standard wall text. At this point, after having done research on the piece for this program, I think it would be worthwhile to bring this object into the galleries for exhibition, but there's still more research to be done. Taylor, did you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think, well, one thing that we just discussed before we got on was first that, these objects are constantly teaching us new things. And I'm so excited by what you learned through preparing for this program. And more practically, this work was also cut from the exhibition as physical constraints came into play. We had decided we wanted at least one three-dimensional artwork in each of those four categories. And with the physical constraints of the gallery, we knew we didn't have space to properly show it as well.
Do you want to pull up the?
Yeah, and we did pull the, you have the image of it, but also we wanted to give you a sense of scale and materials.
Yeah, so you'll notice that really, I think what struck me as the similarity to the Nkisi is the points, right, that are pressed along this entire body. And that's repeated in that example that I showed from the Metropolitan. Okay.
Yeah, fascinating what you uncovered.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. Okay. And our next object, you'll see why we don't have it pulled from collection storage today. It's rather large, so we'll share our screen again. And this is a mixed media fiber hanging by Arthur Amiot. Arthur Amiot was born in the Pine Ridge Reservation and credits his work in tribal arts to living on the reservation and being with his family members as they participated in traditional art forms and ceremonies. Dakota artist Oscar Howe inspired him to utilize his Lakota art culture and his artworks. Amiot is a highly sought after author and lecturer on contemporary American Indian art and the recipient of many awards. His career as one of the most influential artists portraying Lakota life, thought, and philosophy in the Northern Plains region spans 4 decades. And although Amiot, I think, is perhaps best known as a collage artist, the museum collection also includes 3 fiber weavings by him. This weaving is 84 by 54, and it's an abstracted depiction of a Nagite, double woman, one of 2 spirits who had been banished to the surface of the earth before there were any people. This is part of the Lakota emergence story, and the full Lakota emergence story can be learned through a really thoughtful video that Abby and I both watched on the National Parks website, and I encourage you to watch it. But since this work depicts a Nagite who had 2 faces, one beautiful and one gnarled and twisted, the artist intended it to be hung from the ceiling so that it could be viewed on both sides. So on the right is a collections photograph of one side of the weaving, and then on the left is the work on display at the museum in an exhibition about 10 years ago, just to give you a sense of its scale and how it's supposed to be shown. And I really hope to show this piece as it's such an interesting study of an abstracted figure. And we had looked at showing it potentially even in the portraiture section, and we kept looking for different spaces in the gallery that would properly fit it. But in the end, we had to cut it as we just didn't have the space to properly and safely display it as Amiot intended.
And I don't have anything to add for this piece, although I do hope to get to see it in an exhibition soon. So this next work by Sheila Agee, She Could Never Sing, was another work that we were not able to include. And through an engagement lens, this piece is excellent. I can imagine school groups investigating this work really energetically because of the figures and kind of the eerie quality to it. However, it does not necessarily have thematic relevance to the 4 sections that have been laid out for the exhibition. So it's clearly not a representation of figures in the nude or figures at rest. And at the same time, it is neither a portrait nor a work in motion. I think the piece is most closely related to figures in motion, yet the figures are eerily planted in their positions, and the signifier of motion is the representation of mouths agape, as if speaking, singing, or screaming in unison. So unfortunately, this one is that question of thematic relevance. It didn't make it. But Taylor, did you want to comment on this work?
Yeah. In preparing for this, I told Abby I just kind of have a personal note on this piece, in that it's one of my favorite mixed media pieces in the collection, and I've been looking for a proper exhibition to include it in, but this was a case of having to tell myself to step back from personal biases and ask myself which artworks would best serve the goals of the exhibition. And I know, like Arthur Amiot's piece, we'll find a future show in which this piece will fit perfectly. Yeah, and then we wanted again to give you a sense of its scale, and this is kind of interesting because you can see it unmatted and you see the full size of the paper, and how the artist laid the composition out. Okay. And piece 5, we'll move on to. Okay. And finally, this lithograph on Arches paper is by the artist Paul Wunderlich and is part of the Cockerline collection, which includes nearly 600 fine art prints of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Neil Cockerline collected an impressive survey of printmaking, mostly American printmaking, and donated his collection to the museum about 10 years ago. And since that time, the collection has been a really rich resource for study by scholars and students, and particularly for use in exhibitions. There's probably a dozen prints from the Cockerline collection in the Pose Repose exhibition. Wunderlich was a German artist, German painter and sculptor, primarily known for his surrealist works. As noted by the Homan Contemporary Art Gallery, Wunderlich emphasized the human form within a context that blends together contemporary and historical references. With cool aloofness, he transports the viewer into a world of aesthetic symbolism and a dose of irony. So this particular lithograph was one of 2 selections I had made for Pose that have very direct art history references and reimaginings. Sfumato for Klaus Oldenburg is the title, and sfumato is the technique of allowing tones and colors to shade gradually into one another, producing softened outlines or hazy forms. So here, not only does Wunderlich's hazy mark making achieve that, but the depicted figure, Mona Lisa's form, is softened and deflating almost. Wunderlich dedicates this piece to his contemporary, Klaus Oldenburg, perhaps best known in the Midwest for his public art sculpture, Spoon, Bridge, and Cherry at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. And again, this piece was ultimately cut from the exhibition as we had another selection, a piece by Joseph Levi that's in the show that had similar concepts and art historical references. And we felt that a repetition of these things wouldn't strengthen the show. But to be honest, I'm so glad to have a reason to talk about this piece today and get to share it with you all.
Yeah, and I also don't have anything to add, but I do recommend, if you have not yet seen Pose Repose, please come visit us and check it out.
Yeah.
So at this point, we'll open up for any questions or conversation.
And Carolyn, did I catch one coming through the chat earlier?
Yes, Lenico just had a comment. Would you like to make that yourself, Lenico? You can unmute.
Actually, I was, well, good morning, everybody. I was just responding to Lawrence's question. He asked of the previous piece, what does the number 5 mean? And I thought it meant proximity of distance, that, you know, when you have a prickly personality in your midst, you want to get away from that person. So that stands out as a pretty strong reference to that individual. The viewer is possibly interpreting that you need to be 5 feet away from this person to be safe, or to whatever, pertaining to the racist condition the artist is trying to express.
Yeah, and I think you might have been able to see it on the high def camera view, but the bottom, the base of the sculpture is a black and white rings of a target. and it counts 1, 2, 3, 4, with 5 as the central number, right? So I think it's also trying to maybe do that highlight of almost target practice, with the goal of hitting the sculptural body.
Yeah, so here's the outer rings of the target. 1, 2, 3, 4 with the figure marked 5.
Yeah, and so Betty, I see your question. Does the artist have a genealogical or other relationship to the African source? So Michael Warwick is a longtime resident of Arkansas, and he is a white artist. His work, I would say this is one of his earlier pieces, because now his work is mostly, it seems to be like sculptural, large landscape sculptural pieces in Midwest cities. And he continues to address racial injustice. And recently he did a piece that is in a park that talks about desegregation in Arkansas. So, you know, I think he is very much interested in exploring the really complicated relationship between art and the world around us and the racism that is occurring. As I said, I think that this piece, it touches upon a couple different places where I feel like as an educator, I would like to do more research and kind of get a better understanding. I've also thought about reaching out to Michael, because that artist statement is from 1989. And I wonder what an artist statement from him today might look like. Yeah. So Pat, are you talking about the materials in Racist Target? I believe it's wood.
Yeah, I think it's all painted wood with just vinyl. The letters are vinyl cut, but the rest is all wood. And the figure does have articulated limbs, so the arms move, but the spikes are wood, and yeah, it's all wood.
So you could move the arms if. Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah. And for Brookings residents, Abby mentioned Michael Warwick's public art pieces, and there is actually one in Brookings in Larson Park. He did the public art sculpture there as well. So
I'm so glad to hear that the Cockerline collection is being used in exhibits. It came in during my time, and it was an acquisition committee discussion about whether to bring it in, and we thought it was valuable. So it's really nice to see that connection.
Sure. Thanks for that comment, Marilyn, because I know when, and you might be able to speak to this, when that collection came about, it seemed like such a great opportunity, particularly since we're on a university campus, to have this really survey collection. But it kind of redefined what our collection was. We had really focused on Midwest and specifically South Dakota artwork. So we had to redefine what we were collecting at that time. And I think it was a really smart decision by the staff and by the board that they approved that, because every exhibition, permanent collections exhibition, includes works from the Cockerline, and they're just great educational tools. And I love that. I love that collection because it's a mix of really well-known artists and ones that are more local that are so fun to share. So.
Yeah. And it was, based upon the comments of Dorothy Morgan and Lenico, who said, we really need to have a collection that represents something, at least part of it, to be more global. So that I just am so happy to see that you're using it.
Yeah. Thank you.
I remember also the comments at the time of acquisition of this collection. The comments were sort of, how did Cockerline decide to give gift to the South Dakota Art Museum? Because he was also thinking of giving it to the MIA. And he was convinced, rightly so, that it would be put to much better use and it would become a star if it came to the South Dakota Art Museum, whereas it would just be among all the others at the MIA, just part of the, all.
Yeah, no, great point, Betty. Certainly. Yeah, and I had mentioned our connection to the Midwest Art Conservation Center, and that's where our relationship with, or our connection with Neil Cockerline had began, because he was a conservator there and did a lot of projects with us in collections throughout the years. With former collections curator Lisa Skolton, and I think he saw the collections care that we do here and thought that it would be a great home, and like you say, Betty, that it would be used a lot. So
Yeah, and he also taught a course in conservation here. Yeah, downstairs in the museum's little room. I attended that.
Oh, interesting.
People, maybe 15 people taking that course.
Great, interesting.
And Taylor, that prompted with that first work, My Norwegian Friend, approximately how much would it cost to have that restored or conserved?
My best answer is I don't know, to be honest.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
You
But
might
I
have
think
to,
it will go to the lab someday.
yeah,
So.
you may have to get an estimate from the conservation lab for that.
Right. Yep. We would take it up there and they'd do a full treatment proposal that would outline its condition issues and their proposed treatment and a cost. So
Yeah.
I think that's something in its future.
And we just did that with how many works?
Yeah, so last year we had the conservators come on site. So typically we take works to them in Minneapolis to treat, but last year we had a paintings conservator come on site and do a survey of, I think it was about 50 paintings from the collection. And they did kind of a ranking system of one is in immediate need of conservation. And this painting, I think, would probably be in that category. And it just helps us make a plan for which works we need to have at the conservators. Any other questions?
Did have a comment from Diane about it was a very interesting presentation. I enjoyed seeing each artwork and hearing your explanations. This helps me understand the thoughts and study that goes into the exhibition that I enjoy so much.
Good. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you so much, Diane.
Well, and I want to jump in here just for a moment, and in getting back to this conversation of conservation, and make sure that we acknowledge Sue and Kurt Wishmeyer, who so generously funded that painting survey for the South Dakota Art Museum. And so, conservation is one of those ways that the donors can have a direct impact in the preservation of our collections. So, if that's something that interests you, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, because, museums are about sharing work like we do through our exhibitions, but we're also about protecting work. And while I'm on here, just want to say hello to everyone and thank you so much for being here, and great job, Taylor and Abby.
Yeah.
Thank you for the air claps. Yeah, well, and thanks so much to Carolyn Hart for managing Zoom, and Abby Gibro for doing all the tech that is behind the scenes. We're really appreciative of the team.
Yes, and we'll produce a video of this within the next week or so that you can watch it again, because there was a lot of really good content in this. And it'll be fun to share with folks who weren't joining us now, but can watch 24/7 our YouTube channel.
Yeah, thanks for starting your morning with us.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye. Happy Tuesday.
Have a great day.